Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 second. There's a few people coming into the room. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Jurch, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the Center for Policy and Practice at the Association of Community College Trustees. Thank you for joining us for this discussion today to talk about some research around non-credit workforce programs and an often overlooked perspective, the students. We're going to discuss why are they taking these programs and what do they hope to gain from them. This webinar is part of a series on various aspects of non-credit programs and data that we have been partnering with the Education and Employment Research Council on, so be sure to check out the other topics on our website. Before we get started, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session, and the recording will be sent to the registrants as well as posted on our website. I'll be monitoring the chat functions, so if you would like to ask a question, please use that. And we will have time towards the end for questions, so please don't hesitate to ask them at any point during the session, and then we'll address them either during the session or at the end. So non-credit workforce education continues to gain in popularity and accounts for an estimated 40% of community college enrollments nationwide. These programs serve diverse needs, providing occupational training geared towards adults seeking skills for new or current jobs or upskilling for their current roles. With the shifting focus of the administration and employers towards skills, non-credit education, particularly career-focused programming, is quickly growing in prominence. Student interest in these programs is high, with more than 2/3 of respondents to one survey indicating that in considering higher education, they would prefer a non-degree to a degree granting pathway. State investments to support attainment of short-term non-degree credentials continues to grow, with 26 new initiatives in 2025 alone. With the recently passed Workforce Pell legislation, these programs will continue to have a spotlight on them. With the increased attention comes an increased need to better understand various aspects of these programs. Questions around value, quality, and labor market outcomes are driving the initiatives around better data. One area that is rapidly gaining momentum is who are these students that are enrolling in these programs and why are they pursuing them? There are significant gaps in understanding student experiences, perspectives, and decision-making processes. We need to better understand their short and long-term goals, the prior education and employment experiences they bring to their programs, and their challenges and needs for support in completing their programs. That's why I'm so grateful to be joined by two people today who are really trying to understand the perspective of the student. Dr. Catherine Hughes is a senior research consultant with Rutgers University Education and Employment Research Center and the principal of Edwardian LLC. She's had previous roles with the American Institute for Research and the College Board, and for many years held a leadership position at the Community College Research Center. Her research and publications have addressed college readiness and the high school to college transition, career and technical education, dual enrollment, and various aspects of community colleges. Nikki Boyd is a research project manager at the Education and Employment Research Center. Her research focuses on the intersection between education and workforce development, with a particular interest in how lifelong learning, stackable credentials, and accessible pathways to education influence employment, earnings, and quality of life. She previously held leadership roles at Focus New Jersey, the Center for Economic Research and Workforce Solutions, and the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. But before we get into the research, I want to turn it over to Michelle Van Noy, who is the director of the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers and has more than 20 years of experience conducting research on education and the workforce, focused on credentials, community colleges, and connections between higher education and the labor market, to talk a little bit more about the EERC and its work. So I'm going to stop sharing. So Michelle, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate the chance to share more about our work. Let me just see if I can get my slides organized here to run them. We are really happy to have this chance to share our research. Let me see. Okay, pull up my slides. So I want to talk about a few different sources of data. So as Steve mentioned, we've been doing at ERC, we've been doing a lot of work on non-credit, non-degree credentials. We also are part of a research collaborative called the Non-Credit Research Collaborative, where we are partnering with other lead researchers in our field to develop and share research on non-credit. I'm hoping, are my slides coming through okay? I'm hoping my computer's just being a little weird right now. Sorry.
They're not full screen, Michelle.
There we go. I'm trying to get that up. Okay. So is that
Great.
coming up now? Okay, so there you go. So this is the Non-Credit Research Collaborative. I wanted to share a little bit more information on that. So ERC is a member of the Non-Credit Research Collaborative, along with Mark D'Amico, Professor of Higher Ed at UNC Charlotte, Dee Zhu, Professor of Education at UC Irvine, and Peter Barr, who's a VP and Managing Research Director at Strata Institute for the Future of Work. All of us have spent a number of years doing research on non-credit, and we have a repository of research that I wanted to make sure everybody knows about, which shares all the research that each of us has done in non-credit. And it's at a website called noncreditresearch.org. So you can find out, research, all the latest research that each of us has been doing, and also sort of the history and backlog of research that we've done over time. That's there. So if you really want to see kind of what we know about non-credit from the work that we all have done, it's all in one place on that website. So just want to make sure everyone knows that that's a resource. And then, I want to also just share a little bit more about the Rutgers Education and Employment Research Center. We do a lot of work on this intersection between education and work, and have spent a lot of time focused on community colleges and their important role in the workforce, and many other topics. Right now, we've been spending a lot of time, obviously, addressing this issue of non-credit education and non-degree credentials. So that's an important part of our work. We also, have spent a lot of time looking at how students navigate education and career pathways, whether it be in non-credit programs or other kinds of programs. We are very interested in how institutions engage with the labor market. We've done work with community colleges on how they use labor market data, for example, and how they've reformed their workforce programs and career pathways programs and such. So we spend a lot of time thinking with community colleges about how they innovate, whether it be through research or evaluation. And we also spend a good amount of time looking at the technician workforce and looking at how education can help people prepare for those kinds of jobs. We're also very interested in topics like apprenticeship and other things that we'll be doing more work in the future. So we have a lot of things going on at ERC. I want to make sure you know about one project. I just want to quickly share for everyone to know about, because there's been so much interest in non-credit education with the passage of Workforce Pell. We do have a fairly large project called our State Non-Credit Data Project. It's really focused on working with states around building up their non-credit data. We know many, community colleges are also very deeply engaged in those questions and conversations. And so we do have resources on that project that we think are helpful for both states and for institutions. We have a taxonomy for non-credit data that we have put out, and we're going to be releasing a new version very soon that's built on research across many states that have non-credit data. So it sort of gives you a menu of options of what is possible and what has been important to other states. We'll also have some work coming out real soon on policy and governance in states around non-credit. So just a snapshot there. And a plug also, in case anyone's interested in joining some of our webinars that we have on that project, just to learn more about what's going on with the data project. We have our next webinar coming up on June 8th. Anybody's welcome to join. We also have some groups that are more focused for state people who are interested in learning more about data. So I will stop using up our time, because I know everybody really wants to hear about our speakers today and the important role of students and their decision-making process. So I'm going to stop there and turn things over to our others.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. And thank you, Steve, for hosting us today. And thanks to everyone who's joining us. You can go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to go a little bit into some of the previous research that we've done on non-credit workforce education, and then we will share the findings from our most recent study of the students enrolled in those programs. So Steve went over a little bit of this before, that non-credit education is really newly important and much more visible than it used to be. It used to be called the hidden college. It wasn't a main focus of the college. It didn't get much attention. Well, it is definitely no longer hidden. We've got this national focus on it. On the individual level, Steve mentioned some of these surveys of individuals saying they prefer a non-degree option. There's an even newer survey from the Wall Street Journal saying that a majority of Americans believe that a four-year college education is no longer worth the cost. So, some concern about investing a lot of time and money into different credential options. And so at the state level, we see billions of dollars going into these programs. Some of it really is making it more affordable for students, either financial aid directly to the students or to the institutions. And there are also capacity building funds for institutions. And then at the national level, Steve also mentioned Workforce Pell, which will make some of these short-term occupational programs eligible for Pell Grants. That's still, we'll see how that plays out. But we've got greater importance of this. And so with that, next slide, please, Nikki. A couple of years ago, Michelle and Nikki and another EERC colleague, Sam Scoville, did a review of the research on student outcomes of these programs. So really important to see, what do we know so far about how things turn out for the students who enroll in and invest in these programs. And you see only 15 studies, the time that they were doing this research review, different sources of data, surveys, state administrative data, different methodologies. And so different data, different sources, some state focused, some, administrative data. So it makes it difficult to compare across these studies, but we can see a few different takeaways on the next slide. We've got one of the issues is the demographic data are often limited. They're often missing. They're just plain missing in the data. So we don't know a lot about the different student groups that are enrolled in these programs. We do see in several studies and states report, colleges and states report that non-credit students do tend to be older than students in credit programs. And we also see that males and females tend to enroll in different types of programs. And we also see that for high school level career technical education, where you see males and females in different types of programs. So the promising thing is we do see in some studies that there are some measurable labor market gains. Some earnings are higher. You see those with certificates do earn more than just high school graduates without certificates, but still less than adults who go on and complete a year or more of college. But again, these results vary across data sets. They vary across states. We do see that the wages also vary according to the field that the student is in. So whether it's manufacturing or retail, you really need to look specifically at the fields to see how the students are faring after those programs and those credentials. And finally, there's one more. There we go. The studies are really showing that few students who are non-credit transition to credit pathways. And so we know that this is being discussed a lot and is a hope of many of us that students will go on and get more education and perhaps enter credit pathways. But most of the research now is really not showing that so far. Let's go on then to EERC research. These are 3 studies that we've completed over the past few years. The QR codes are there for you. The first one on the shifting landscape. This report is at the institution or college level. The second one looking at the program level, approaches to quality in specific programs at community colleges. And the third, we conducted a survey of some non-credit students at 3 different colleges. And I'll share a little bit about each of these. So for the first one, this shifting landscape, we conducted interviews with administrators at 29 colleges across 22 states. And these are some of the things that we asked about and learned about. So the first thing is that many colleges were shifting away from general community education type offerings in their non-credit programming, those courses like wine tasting and landscape painting. Well, colleges were really cutting down on these, if not eliminating them altogether, and really focusing on the workforce offerings. So in doing that, that was also reconsidering, the targeted student population for their offerings. So really shifting to looking at people who really need to come to the colleges for skills and training for jobs. We also saw these big shifts in the organization of non-credit education. So we asked things like, well, where is it located within your college? What division is it in? Where is it? And found really a lot of variation. Some of them were moving it around. They were shifting the non-credit to be in the same area as the for-credit CTE programming. Others we saw keeping it separate on purpose, having it be a whole separate division, some even having new branding for their non-credit division. So a lot of changes, a lot of shifting and moving around. We also saw increased partnerships, partnerships with other colleges. Some were creating consortia, partnerships with organizations and firms, in some cases outsourcing some of the courses with vendors. That was also interesting. And then we saw some different and new types of marketing, like new ways of outreach for these programs. Some of the colleges were emphasizing that these were short term, that you could come to the college and in a day, a week, a month, 3 months, you could get some skills and get some training. So that was also really interesting to us. Let's go on to the next report, the Its Own Standard Approaches to Quality report. This was a study we did partnering with Northern Virginia Community College, Mount San Antonio College in California, Harper in Illinois, and LaGuardia College in New York. And it really drew on prior research at EERC on quality in non-credit workforce education, really proposing that these 8 areas are really the design elements of quality non-credit programs. So with these 4 colleges, we chose 2 programs at each of the college and really delved into those specific programs, looking at labor market relevance. How was labor market data being used to determine program offerings? Stackability and articulation, curriculum and instruction, and who were the instructors, and did they have work experience? Did they have the credentials for the programs that they were teaching? We didn't find necessarily that these were all fully implemented or super smooth in these programs. For example, the stackability articulation, that was mostly in the early stages, but the report has a lot of examples of really great quality decision-making and quality practices at these colleges. So I encourage you to check that out. And very quickly, the third study that I mentioned on the student survey is just some really quick takeaways with that. We surveyed students at 3 of those colleges asking about their purpose for being in the program and what their challenges were. And really, most of the students did say they enrolled because they wanted skills to change their job. So, and not necessarily to have skills to progress in their current positions, but they were looking for new positions, new jobs, and came to the college in order to try to achieve that. So I encourage you to look at that report as well. Now let's go to the current work that Steve mentioned up front. We went from the college level, the institution level, to the program level. We surveyed some students, and then we thought we really have to get more in depth with students. We need to really talk to them and have some interviews where we can really understand their decisions and their goals. So that's what this new report is: deeper information from the students. These are the research questions. Why and how did they enroll? Why did they decide to do that? What do they hope to gain? from these programs and the credentials that they'll receive from the programs. And then looking at their education histories, their work, their family, how does all of that shape their decision to enroll? We did focus on adults with no prior degree. We know that there are a lot of students already with degrees who then are going back to get these short-term non-degree credentials, but we decided for our purposes to focus on adults without a degree, so we screened those out of our sample. We conducted interviews about 45 minutes long with 83 students at Nova, Mount SAC, and at LaGuardia College. Now we've got this poll for you, if you'd like to, before we talk about the students that we spoke with and what we learned about them. Those of you at colleges, how would you best describe your non-credit students?
And for folks who haven't used the Slido before, you can just scan the QR code and it should automatically pop up on your phone for you to submit responses.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. Quick turnaround, paycheck fast, job changer. Mhm. Dedicated. It's nice.
Just really quickly, why folks are still adding words to the chat. We've done this presentation a few times now, and one of the words that has really stuck with me as we think about how we're going to continue this work is misunderstood. And there's some sort of perception, what that might mean to you might be different based off your institution of like who are the students enrolling in non-credit workforce education. And the folks at the colleges are saying, what the stereotype may be isn't actually who these students are. And they've had a lot of diverse experiences and really nonlinear, complicated lives that for them, this is their way of getting back into higher education.
This is great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll show you an overview of the sample that we ended up with, the 83 students.
And no one's typing. All right. Ready to move on, Kathy?
Yeah, sure. This was our final sample. And so we did have some students in the younger age range, what we would call more traditional students, right? But our age range was 18 years old to 60. So you see those 6 individuals who were between 50 and 60 years ago, old, coming back for skills and for a change in their circumstances. And otherwise, you just see a lot of diversity here, more females than males, which is the case in a lot of colleges, as we understand. And then let's look at some of the sample programs that they were enrolled in, just to give you a sense. A lot of healthcare programs. These are, I'm sure, familiar to those of you at colleges, all the different healthcare programs that are being offered, but also some business programs and trades and IT. And then we have a few others that didn't fit into any of those categories, like commercial driver's license, registered behavioral technician. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to share our findings.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, so our first finding is this idea of a nonlinear and interrupted post-secondary pathway. So one of the biggest things that we found was that 7 in 10 of our interviewees had prior enrollment in higher education. Almost 2/3 of those had prior enrollment in credit-bearing courses only. We saw a smaller number of students that had prior enrollment in either non-credit or both credit and non-credit. And then 25% of our sample was simultaneously enrolled in a credit bearing course or non-credit bearing course while also being enrolled in the non-credit course that we were interested in for our study. It's really important to note here that many of the students in our sample had not been in higher education of any sorts for many decades, and many students tried multiple times to be successful in higher ed, and for various reasons just were not. So there were many reasons why individuals were unsuccessful in their college attempts. The first is that they disliked online learning, which particularly arose during the COVID era pandemic. Now, I will caveat that with there was also a subset of our students who loved online learning and the flexibility that it provided with them. But overall, students tended to dislike the online learning component. Some students had a lack of motivation or maturity. One student in particular sticks out to me, and she said, I was previously enrolled in a credit bearing course, but I was doing basically everything except for going to class and doing my homework. And so she in particular was just not prepared for the commitment that credit bearing courses brought with it. Some students also felt like they lacked academic preparation, or they weren't interested in the prerequisite courses that they needed to take in order to get to the courses that they were interested in. And then, of course, as Kathy alluded to, our sample did tend to be older. And as you are older, comes more personal and life issues. And so for a lot of students, life just happened to get in the way. We did see a lot of teen pregnancy and young adult pregnancy, both for men and women. And oftentimes, folks were saying to us, I just needed to get a job so that I could pay the bills and put food on the table for myself and my family. Now, I don't typically like reading directly off of slides, but this is the perspective of students. And so I think it's really important to share that student voice. And so for these next couple slides, I will read direct quotes from what students told us. This first student said, I have some credits towards nursing already, but I couldn't continue because I didn't have a steady job. With life and rent, I was in and out of jobs, sometimes lost jobs, which made me drop out of school entirely to focus on getting a job and paying rent. A few more findings that students told us. I tried going to school. I've tried in my 20s. I tried in my 30s. I get impatient and I've dropped out so many times. And then I was going for computer science and I got stuck on those English classes in the beginning. I'm like, I'm not even an English person. I'm a computer person, you know? But you got to take those prerequisites to do other stuff. And I just gave up. We also found that there were varying goals for enrollment, and that really depended on the student, right? The individual students. So the older population of students, which was the majority of our sample, really felt that entering their non-credit workforce program was to meet an immediate need to get employed now, whether that was to have a better job prospect, to change their job altogether, or to become employed when they currently were unemployed. Other students saw this more as exploratory or a stepping stone. An example of exploratory was an individual who was interested in floral design. So she decided to take the course to see if that's something that she wanted to continue to pursue. The younger subset of our sample saw the non-credit education enrollment as a stepping stone. These students tended to be simultaneously enrolled in either non-credit or credit programs, most commonly in healthcare programs. And so what we heard from these students were, I'm doing this non-credit workforce education program as a prerequisite or to gain experience in order to continue on my education, whether that be nursing school, to go into the medical field, or something like a respiratory therapist track. Now, there's an academic concept called swirling, where previous iterations of the concept were talking about degree-seeking students who would move back and forth from a 2 or a 4-year institution. In our study, we proposed to expand this concept to students who were moving not only back and forth between the 2 and the 4-year institution space, but also between the credit and the non-credit space as well. And so when I give this presentation, I like to talk about sort of An interview which was an egregious example of swirling. We had a student who quite literally had 6 non-credit credentials. She enrolled 6 different times in 6 completely different programs. They were really all over the board, talk about a very nonlinear pathway, and she didn't really have a clear goal on where she was trying to go, except for that she just kept enrolling in courses that were interesting to her. And so she was sort of stuck in this higher education space, but not really moving towards a degree and also not really moving towards an employment goal either. So another quote for you. I'm in a place right now in my life where it's like I'm 37, I'm getting older. I know I need something to be stable. I want consistency. I also want a job where where there's opportunities to grow. A few more quotes. I need to make money. That's the bottom line. This is the only tool for that. I just needed something to get out of what I was doing. And finally, I'm studying on the pre-med track, hopefully going to go to medical school in a few years. I wanted some clinical experience, and the CCMA program stood out to me because of the amount of hands-on patient interaction that you get from that role. So if you get nothing else out of the presentation today, I really want to emphasize that feasibility and affordability were key for enrolling in non-credit workforce education. We heard over and over again that the free or low cost nature, the affordable nature of these programs is what attracted students into them. Now I'm going to go through the rest of these bullet points, but then I'm going to go back to the affordability piece and just talk about some slight differences at our institutions that we saw. Other important factors for us, for our students, was college proximity, as well as the short-term nature of the program, the convenience of the course schedules, whether those courses would be offered at multiple times a day, multiple times a year, morning classes, afternoon classes, weekend classes. Students loved that they were able to choose a schedule that best fit them. Next was the immediate course start dates. Interestingly enough, we saw a non-zero number, so more than one student who said, I wanted to enroll in non-credit education. I had a specific program in mind. However, that course wasn't going to start for 6 weeks. And so I ultimately ended up enrolling in another course that was still in the same field, but wasn't my initial idea for the course that I wanted to take. So a more specific example of that was a student wanted to enroll in an electrician course, but the plumbing course was going to start sooner. And so they decided to enroll in the plumbing course instead. So students liked the convenience, the accommodating nature of these programs, that they weren't very long and that they were free or affordable and low cost. So some differences between our institutions. Students at LaGuardia most commonly talked about looking for the most affordable or the cheapest option to them. LaGuardia had the least amount of funding available to the students, so their students were most commonly self-paced students. And those students always talked about how they were looking for the program that was the most affordable or fit into their budget. Students at Mount SAC received a lot of funding, and these programs tended to be 60% of them were completely free for the students. There were some outliers in that students sometimes had to pay for things like books or specific like stethoscopes for their classes. However, Mount SAC does a really great job of identifying student needs and helping to give students additional support when they're needed. Some examples of that would be helping to pay for bus loans, or also helping to identify students who couldn't afford the extra equipment that they need to buy, and they would provide students with gift cards to be able to go and purchase those things as well. Nova had a little bit of a different funding structure, and that is they had a pay for performance structure, which would help students pay for some of their courses. And then in addition to that, they also had low income funding available for students as well. So another quote for you. I've been in school before this. I've always gotten overwhelmed because of home life and school life, but this was very easy. It was in the evening and 3 hours. So this was the first thing that I've started and completed. I started trying to apply to classes that were in the Fast Forward program because, I'm low income. I couldn't actually afford to go to school, but I just needed something to get out of what I was doing. Okay, this is another Slido for everybody. And this is really great feedback for us. If you could scan the QR code and just rank the findings in order of what resonated the most with you in these findings versus what resonated the least.
And while people are filling that out, just a reminder, don't be afraid to enter questions into the chat. We will answer them towards the end of the presentation. And I just would like to say that this has been very validating. Before ACCT, I worked at a community college managing workforce programs, and all of the things that you are saying is what I experienced. The difference is it was all anecdotal, like there was no research out there. So this is like finally, and we would always tell people, these are our students, this is what they need. But, it was all like, oh, you're just saying that. But now we're seeing this research being done. And so it's very validating. And so I really think that these programs are going to be able to be improved to better meet the needs of the students. So I just want to say, I'm, this is very validating for me. So thanks for doing all this research.
It's always great to hear when it's validating. I think that it's fair to say that that's been the majority consensus when we give this presentation, and our stakeholders have been excited that there's research around it now and to start to make the changes that are needed to support these students. Yeah, feasibility, that's overwhelmingly number one as well when we do this Slido poll with folks, and the nonlinear and interrupted pathways. Great. Well, thank you everybody for participating. I'm going to turn this back over to Kathy to bring us home.
Thank you, Nikki. A few reflections now. We do need to better understand the circumstances that drive the swirling. Students going back and forth and trying this and trying that. And as we saw in our data, sometimes this occurring over not just years, but decades. So is it better advising that they need? I mean, would some of these students have come back and completed something sooner if they knew about the shorter term options available, or if they had better advising? I'm sure you can see from these quotes that many of these students' stories are extremely poignant. I mean, they tried credit early on, some of them right after high school, as they thought they were supposed to. But then when it didn't work out, they have these long histories of low wage work. And Nikki is working on a brief now that delves more into their employment histories and describing them and how they influenced their decisions to go back to college. So we need to understand this better and help advise them about their options and get them back onto something feasible for them much sooner. And feasibility, as Nikki emphasized, affordability, free is key to many of their decisions. We know that some individuals would not have come back at all if it weren't for these short-term, feasible, affordable options. Many of them said they are not interested in longer credit-based programs. And if those were the only options, they would not have chosen to come back. So that's an important message, we think, from this. And then a few concerns. The next slide, please. They really did not have any professional career advising. Most of these students, almost all, were really relying on friends, family, and their own research to learn about these programs and make a decision. They were not getting career advising. They did not use the advising services of the college. They tended to meet with college advisors once they had already enrolled. So they'd already made the decision, already enrolled. And then at that point, they were often required to participate in some kind of orientation, college orientation or program orientation, or a session where college staff would describe the program expectations and things like that. But that would be after they had already enrolled. We also saw that their program choices, they don't always align with their stated goals. So this goes also to the career and college advising piece. For example, we had someone in a pharmacy technician program, and their ultimate goal is to be a registered nurse. So while pharm tech is also in the healthcare field, it's not really a direct line from there to RN. You would think they would instead choose a certified nursing assistant program to start getting that patient care experience, or to even sign up for their credit prerequisites for a nursing program. Those things seem to be more aligned with their long-term goal. And we did not follow up with these students to look at their outcomes, their employment and income outcomes. That wasn't part of the study. So we do not know that. And just as we mentioned earlier, we do need much more research on outcomes. So thank you very much. Are we going back to Steve now?
Yes. I just wanted to say thank you, but at the same time, I just put in the chat to make sure everyone asks questions, but I do have a couple that I wanted to sort of kick us off with. And this is for anyone. So, I mentioned that when I was at the college, most of this information was anecdotal, and I didn't know if you had any perspective on why do you think that there's such a lack of studies around the student perspective, particularly around these non-credit programs?
It is difficult to get students to respond to research requests. It just is just plain difficult. With the previous study that we did, the survey of students, we had great collaboration from the colleges. They were sending out the survey link repeatedly, and we still did not have very good response rates. And even the students who responded to that survey didn't answer all of the questions. For this study, the interview study, it took us much, much longer to even get to those 83 interviews than we anticipated. We did originally offer $25 for an interview. That wasn't getting us where we wanted to go. Once we doubled that to $50 per interview, things started to move along more quickly, but we had to tweak that incentive payment and tweak some of our other procedures to just get that number, to get 83 across 3 colleges. So it's just challenging to get them.
So would you say it's more logistically, there's a more logistical reason rather than an interest reason, or or is it, I guess now that the interest is there, maybe the logistics are challenging. I know that.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. I mean, in general, in research, we find that people appreciate that someone's interested in their lives, and when you get the chance to talk to them, they appreciate that, and they're interested in sharing their perspectives. But catching them, and especially this population who are working and going to school and likely have family responsibilities as well, is difficult. We did also find that catching them just on the phone was easier also than Zoom. We were trying to set up Zoom interviews, and that, again, just to the logistics aspect, it was challenging.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely makes a lot of sense. I can't remember if it was Kathy, you or Nikki that brought up most of these, I guess the general consensus is that, of course, students would want to move from a non-credit program to a credit program, right? That just seems so natural, and like we want them to get more education to move up economically. And I know that some of this is now, legislated around workforce Pell. It has to be stackable. It has to be articulated into credit. But the reality is, and I've seen this in other studies as well, is that most students didn't want to or didn't at the time. What do you think it was, or how much do you think it was just lack of understanding about that process versus another reason? And what do you think would make them want to move into a credit program?
I think that's a really great question. So we need to take into consideration the context of our study sample, right? So the majority of our sample was over the age of 25, so adult workers who were looking for an immediate connection to employment. That subset of students overall was not interested in moving to credit education at all, was pretty much a non-starter, right? But there's two different caveats to that. When we look at the younger students in our sample, those students were much more interested and talked a lot more about using the non-credit pathway to either use it as a prerequisite to enrollment, or even though they were enrolled in non-credit, they showed an interest in hopefully in the future someday moving into the credit space, whether that be 2-year or 4-year. There's also another subset of our sample when I'm thinking about Mount SAC. They had a sample of their students who migrated to the United States from other countries. Those students more commonly talked about wanting to use the foundation that they were learning at Mount SAC through their non-credit education to move into a university setting. For students who told us that they weren't interested in moving into the credit space, I'm not sure there is anything that could change their minds. They were enrolling for a very specific reason, and that was to get in, get a skill, whatever that skill might be or be perceived to be, and to get out to move it into the workforce. If I had to give you a more straightforward answer, I think it's the same findings that we found in this study, which is the feasibility and the affordability component of higher education, whether that is non-credit or credit. A lot of students found higher education to be very expensive and unaffordable and unrealistic when they needed to pay rent and put food on the table also.
Yeah. And remember, most of our studies had tried credit at some point. They had tried credit
Right.
and had not completed any kind of credential. They were not successful. So that's their experience of credit.
Right.
Yeah, we saw that. We saw a lot of students coming back into education. They had bad experiences on the credit side, and so they didn't, but once they found out there were other options, they tended to give it another try. Nikki, you were just talking about affordability, and I know that cost is a huge factor. Do you have was in your studies? I know you looked at 3 different states, and they had different funding models for these programs. Did you find that one was better than the other, or more popular, or easier to navigate?
Kathy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, the Virginia Fast Forward program, got some good perspectives from the students about that. And it's not just Fast Forward. Virginia has other programs as well for low-income students. So by the time you add these different funding streams together, it was often free for the students. And they mostly talked about the college staff kind of taking care of it for them. You fill out a form, but then they would figure out what they were eligible for and then come back to them and say, this will be free to you. And which of course would make them very happy. So we see that in Virginia, that there's that dedicated state funding, not for all non-credit, but for certain programs, right, that are deemed like in demand and high need. And in California, there's a dedicated state funding stream also for non-credit. So most of those students weren't paying any tuition. I think Nikki mentioned, they do sometimes have to pay for like their scrubs or other supplies, or maybe an e-textbook. So not always completely without cost, but mostly without cost. And then New York State has no state funding stream that's dedicated. So at LaGuardia, they working really hard to get grants, philanthropy, however they can get funding, really very entrepreneurial in that way, so that they can provide scholarships for students and at least have part of the costs covered for students.
No, that's great. And so we have some questions coming in. So, but I want to ask one more around, you know, you mentioned that how the students learned about these programs was not necessarily through advising. And I have seen recently that there is I don't know, there's more attention being paid around like advising, career counseling, career exploration. Um, do you have any other strategies, or can you talk about some of those strategies? Like, in your interviews, did you hear anything about like, oh, this is how students should learn about this, or this would help students learn about this versus just like, I know that some people are moving to social media influencers to communicate some of these things. So I don't know what your experience around strategies would be.
Do you want this one, Nikki?
Sure. So Kathy and I are working at each other through the screen because we both know where this answer is going, and that is that we had students tell us that they were using ChatGPT in order to find programs that were going to get them the pay that they wanted within their location. We also had quite a few students say that they found their programs on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to social media and the reality of AI and artificial intelligence and the role that that has in our lives, students were also saying that they were hearing about what programs to enroll at and what institutions to enroll at from their families and their communities, coworkers, parents, other siblings and cousins who are working in the field going to certain institutions, institutional reputation as perceived by the individual's community, whoever they associate with, right, played a big influence in why they decided to enroll in that institution or not. Um, in terms of approaches or what are the best strategies, I think based off our findings, I can say it is a reality that students are finding their information on TikTok and social media, in addition to their communities and community-based organizations and other folks that they worked with or are working with that may have previously gone through a program or were enrolled at an institution.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was recently part of a conversation around the use of social media influencers for program education. And
Mhm.
one of the things that was brought up was the I guess the accuracy of the information that a particular person is presenting. And so that can raise challenges as well as like where are these influencers getting this information to present, who is supporting those influencers. And so you want to make sure that, but at the same time, that's where students are going to get information. So you want to make sure that you're meeting the students where they are, but they're getting correct information. So it's this,
Right.
you know, new challenge, shall we say.
Yeah.
So there are some questions. So one of the questions that came in was, are there any major differences in how respondents answered the questions based on their programs of interest?
Hmm.
So I can start from the workforce history perspective because that brief that I'm writing is front and center in my head, and the answer to that question is yes. So I found in that brief, which will be made public hopefully in the next few weeks, is that students who were employed in the general field, so whether that be a professional job directly in the field or a field adjacent, say like a secretary in a medical office who might not be working in a professional job but was seeing what was happening around them, um, they tended to have a closer connection to their job plus their enrollment in a program and where they
Mhm.
hoped to go than an individual who was not in the healthcare field. Now, that a caveat to that is our study was over 60% healthcare field. So, and with a much smaller percentage of all other industries. And so, is that just a finding in our study because we had so many healthcare enrollments? Potentially. But that was certainly a finding as related to um, their previous work and enrollment.
Yeah, it's almost like they got a sort of real life career exploration
Right.
experience. And so they
Hmm.
were like, oh, I see, I like what I see. So I'm going to go into that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting.
Hmm.
Um, did
Someone
any of the
was
programs
asking,
you study
sorry to
use?
interrupt.
Oh,
I
sorry,
just
go ahead, Kath.
someone was asking for the link to the study. Maybe I think there was a QR code on our last slide.
Sure, I'll
Oh,
re-pull
yeah,
that
we
up.
can reshare that.
I can put that in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, no worries, no worries. So did any of the programs, I know some of these school or some of the programs do, but did any of the ones you looked at assist students with job placement after training?
Well, most of the students were in kind of in the middle of their programs when we spoke to them. And we weren't speaking to them at that point where they were, um, with the credential and entering into the workforce but we did conduct interviews, to look into the support services at the colleges that were available to non-credit students, finding if there were, dedicated support services for non-credit or if they would just access the general ones. And the colleges do have dedicated supports for the students, just specifically for non-credit students, which we thought was great. And we know, for example, in New York at LaGuardia, several of their programs were developed with industry. So I think it's a medical billing program. They developed the program with the big hospital systems in New York City. They have all kinds of job shadowing and internships available to the students, and the students are hired into those jobs right from the program by those hospital systems. So it really is. I know we use this word pipeline all the time,
Right.
but this is
Right.
really an example of a direct pipeline. And it's great because then the hospitals hire the students and then they can provide feedback back to LaGuardia if they see that any skills are not where they should be or if they need to add
Right.
any new content to the program.
No, that's great. And just an FYI to everyone on the call, the QR code is reporting deactivated, but Michelle has posted the actual link in the chat.
Thanks.
So another question. So did you find, and maybe this wasn't, you weren't necessarily asking the specifics, but I didn't know if anecdotally, if there was a preference in training length, like 4, 8, 12, did the length of the actual training have an impact?
I think students were more interested in the weeks or the month-long programs over the semester structure. So we didn't ask, would you rather a 4-week program versus a 12-week program? It was just more, do you prefer something that's similar to a traditional,
Right. I
semester,
see.
right? And those students said, hey, I don't want to sit in a classroom for a semester or 8 to get a degree. I would prefer to get in and out as quick as possible. However long that length was, that was in a shorter duration.
They definitely raved about the evening classes,
Yep.
Saturdays. I would say it's just 8 Saturdays, and then I'm done. I've achieved this.
Yeah. Or I could go to work during the day and then go sit in class for 3 hours at night, 3 times a week for however long the course was, and that was sufficient to them.
Yeah, and I think it's important and I think, research like this is important because it also communicates back to the college around when they should be offering these programs. So I want to get into one more question. And just so everyone knows, we will be sending out the recording. We also will be sending out the slide deck, which has the links. And actually, we can include the link to the actual paper in the follow-up email that goes out. Okay, so with Workforce Pell coming out, right, a lot of conversations are around, which programs are going to be, covered under this, or which programs are schools going to put forward as wanting to be funded through Workforce Pell. And there's conversation that, we've been running this program at 6 weeks and it's got a funding stream, but like, do we want to upset the apple cart just to make it fit into the Workforce Pell box? And so I didn't know if you guys had any takes on, how you think Workforce Pell will impact some of these, non-credit workforce programs as far as, their delivery model, their popularity, or things like that. sorry to put you on the spot with that. This one, you can blame the attendee that asked this one. So.
I will say we had some students who said, they didn't want to fill out a FAFSA.
Right.
That was another consideration in why they wanted to sign up for non-credit, because they didn't want to fill out a FAFSA, whether that's a good reason or not. I'm not,
Right.
but for these programs that are already mainly covered by other funding sources, right? Fast Forward in Virginia is very successful. There's now evidence that, what it's doing for the state and individuals. So it seems to be working as it is.
Yeah, I would agree. And we actually thank you for the plug. We did a webinar earlier on the fast forward research that you guys did. So I'm not seeing any more questions and we are at time. So I just want to say thank you very much to our guests. And this is fantastic research. Thank you for doing it. You are making jobs like mine much easier. So please continue to do this good work. And we're excited that we will be able to share with our membership. And again, thanks to all who attended. We'll be sending out the recording and associated materials probably sometime early next week. So thanks and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank
And thanks,
you.
everyone.